It's the morning star drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly. So let's realign, just listen and fill your mind.
I'm burning with desire and the passion. Nobody can stop me when I'm like this. I got my head in the zone, you know. I'm on the morning star drive, you know.
Hey guys, how's it going? It's Wednesday, May 25th. And this is the Morning Star Drive on 117.8. We're on YouTube, so make sure to subscribe, follow us on SoundCloud, and make sure to support us on Patreon. So what is happening on this wonderful Wednesday? We've got current news from around the world. There were no Tuesday Proverbs, so it's Monday Proverbs Word Study, and I'll be giving a personal testimony. All right, everyone, how are you doing? It is hump day. It is the middle of the week. It is Wednesday. Just thankful for all of you joining us here on the Morning Star Drive and looking forward to some amazing preaching tonight by our leaders. So let's kick this day off with today's show. Just want to remind everyone to keep liking, commenting. Let's build our community here. Just want to see how you guys are doing. And of course, this channel here is not to, spread to the entire world. This is just for members. So when we want to build the community, it's just for us. Just a place where all of us can talk, comment each other too. So super happy about this. There was no Tuesday Proverbs, so it's kind of, for me, it's interesting that there's no Proverbs because something is very consistent with these things. And I don't have any information, but it just makes you wonder what is happening in Korea. Like I was talking to a friend yesterday who's also in Korea right now. And the interesting thing is they don't even know what's going on either. I think it's just a small group of people that might know like the full details. And in particular, because, it's possible there could be lawsuits and all these other different things, everything is held tightly, and that is completely understandable because we want no rumors to spread. So I'm not here to spread any rumors or anything else like that, but it makes me really think how much more we need to pray about the situation because, wow, it's like there's no Proverbs. I wonder what is happening over there in Korea in Sunseem's situation. So I hope that this can be certain things that we can look at and say, oh, I wonder what this means. Not just, no Proverbs today. Oh, I wonder what that means. But we know Sunseem, right? And we know how consistent and how responsible he is with these different things. For him to miss one, it's not like scary, but it's something that makes me think like, I don't know what's going on, but I think I should be praying more about this because this is uncommon. This is not a normal thing. So I do think it's something that we can start thinking a little bit more about how to pray for this situation. Oh, and everyone, thank you so much for the comments yesterday about the question I gave is, do I sound fake, right? And the only reason I brought that up is because I was listening to, what was it? I was listening to a podcast, and in the podcast, it was Steve Martin. Those of you guys don't know Steve Martin, he's really, really old stand-up comedian. He was in a bunch of different movies in the past too. And the interesting thing about him is he was on this show, and I was listening to the interview, and he says one time he actually recorded himself. Right, he recorded himself when he was doing stand-up, and this is when he was like, really young and not as much of experience as before. And he said this one time he recorded himself, he was able to see and hear what he really sounded like. You know what I mean? So for me, I was just like, oh, that's quite interesting because inside my head, I sound like I'm having fun inside my head. Right? Inside my head, things are going well. I think I'm speaking well, and I don't think I'm like demeaning people, whatever it is. However, when it comes out of your lips, it's a different situation. So it was interesting for me to see the comments of what people said I sounded like. And the overwhelming majority of you guys are like, oh no, you guys, you sound natural, you sound fine, looks like you're having fun. One person even said that I sounded like kind of like a personal conversation with a friend, and I think that's like one of the ultimate compliments, especially coming from a podcast or a radio show, because it's not, we're not here. I'm not here to be over anyone, but it's kind of, we're all on the same level, going through the same things, and I really hope to give out that vibe. So thank you so much for all your comments on that one question that I gave. So super thankful for that. Tomorrow is my last video. So I haven't even made the new video yet. I got to get in on this, but I'm going to get a haircut first, and then I'll be recording probably on the same day I get the haircut. So I'm super, super happy about that. And that's going to, I got to figure out what am I going to talk about too. But, should be interesting. Like, maybe I'll do the personal testimony I'm going to do today. I don't know. Let's see what I can do at that time. But tomorrow's video is Judah and Tamar. It's very, very interesting and to some people very disgusting. But Judah, one of the 12 sons of Israel, basically sleeps with his daughter-in-law. It's his daughter. Well, at least it's not family, but it's his daughter-in-law. And they have a baby together, and God calls it righteousness. And you're like, what? Like, how does that make any sense, right? So that's going to be a quite interesting topic for a lot of people to look at, too. And also, everyone, remember, this week's Sunday edition, we met Jason Ong over there in Malaysia. Hope you guys are really enjoying that interview. Go ahead and leave a comment below for Jason, too. He's only been a prod for like 6 months, so he's fresh and fiery. And, of course, next week we'll have another interview coming out, too, so look forward to that also. All right, so let's get into today's music from member artists from around the world. That's a tongue twister. Music from member artists from around the world. All right, and we're gonna start off with our feature artist of the day, and it's going to be Rapture Collective over there in Australia. This is their one song that they came out with called "All My Thanks and Love." There's 4 of them in it, plus 1 newcomer, and this song was made, I believe, last year in October for the Giving Glory month in October, and they made this song to give glory to God. Great song. It is rap hip-hop style, so I hope you guys really enjoy that. 2 of them have already doing singles too. It's both Julius and Dan. They're both doing they both have a single out each too, so great job to everyone over there. So that's going to be Rapture Collective from Australia with All My Thanks and Love as the feature artist of the day. Then we have Kuma-chan from Japan with The Greatest Blessing 2022 remix. And last but not least, we have that awesome new song from Dio Wings in Korea. That song is called Flow. And if you guys remember, what are the lyrics about? It's so amazing, guys. It's really good. It's about the slanders at this time. And they're just saying basically, like, just move on with your life. Like, just let it flow. Flow to your own life. Like, stop bothering us, right? And it sounds like a breakup song, but when you know what the actual meaning is, it is an amazing song. Good the lyricism is awesome, right? So everyone, please enjoy as we listen to music from member artists from around the world.
Yeah, welcome to God's new history. Daily preaching, the Bible no longer a mystery. Saving lives, taking action, what a wonderful destiny. Working tirelessly and we can become heavenly. All I ever wanted for you is to see we can become one with the Trinity. A condition was set by His highest. Confess and pray, create a new mindset. If you follow until the end, I promise you, you will surely realize God's divineness.
He's divine, y'all. Alpha and Omega, He's divine. Yeah. So let's reflect on the past. You gotta look deeply at the things God has done. Salvation at the highest has been granted. That's a blessing of blessings, the Lord's mandate. Spring water that heals faster than a band-aid. COVID safe cause His eyes was on us like a magnet. Got the seal on our foreheads, yet they can't do nothing. The devil and his gang have been disbanded.
So I raise my praise to you. So I lift my hands up high. Even in my weakness, even in my struggles, I'll always give my thanks and love. All my thanks and love.
Got so many bars that I never lose signal. Keeping it lit like a candlelight vigil. Lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. God's word is my perspective, the righteous collective. Filtering pollution, being mentally selective. Guarding the heart, it's a protective. Do it in a new way, in spirit and physicality. Do it in a new way, take it higher, raise a level. Giving God glory, God's love is the story. So rich in His love, feeling like a rich miser. Love is exploding like a geyser. Love so contagious, spread across the world like Pfizer. Antidote of the nation.
Reflect on the past. You gotta look deeply at the things God has done. Salvation at the highest has been granted. That's a blessing of blessings, the Lord's mandate. Spring water that heals faster than a band-aid. COVID safe cause His eyes was on us like a magnet. Got the seal on our foreheads, yet they can't do nothing. The devil and his gang have been disbanded.
So I raise my praise to you. So I lift my hands up high. Even in my weakness, even in my struggles, I'll always give my thanks and love.
わり令和の時代成長下から戦う時代うまくいかないうまくやれないことが多いけど決して諦めないあれから7年の月日が経ち巻いた種は少しずつ芽を出し今すべて捨てられざらいあなたに告げて Be alright どんなに険しい道のりでも果てない壁に阻まれても It's fly away Fly away、yeah、天高く頂上目指す観難の波が押し寄せてもこんなに愛が溢れてるから立ち上がれ立ち上がれ、yeah、一人じゃない It's your love
最高の祝福得る時代愛そうこれからの未来に期待世界はまだまるで瞑想未来永劫したくない戦争この時代に訪れた平和最も大きな愛をくれたメシアただ確信してずっと愛そう感謝が溢れる死の栄光
どんなに険しい道のりでも果てない壁に阻まれても It's fly away Fly away、yeah、天高く頂上目指す観難の波が押し寄せてもこんなに愛が溢れてるから立ち上がれ立ち上がれ、yeah、一人じゃない Part of love 主の愛とその恵み忘れないで御言葉を行って御言葉を通し全てに勝って主の軍隊となり黄金の城へ前進する主と共に溢れる祝福をくださった惜しみなくくださった主に感謝する永遠に主のそばで生きられる夢ではない現実主を愛します最高の祝福をくださった心は天国です感謝します主と輝く歴史なそう私を使ってください愛してます愛してます가슴엔 보석을 준비한 탁석을 홈런치고 VIP 개마구원 투숙에 저는 주스 황금 주스 마시고 Let it go 한 발자국 내딛 것도 check 고개리 디기를 꽃길이 맞는 짓도 check 너도 나도 파도의 surfer float 대충 모르면 suffer so far 우리 사이 우린 각자 선택한 것뿐이야 You're delusional
And there it is. What an awesome song. That is Die Wings from Korea. New song just dropped last week, and that song is Flow and is made for the Slanderers. What an awesome summer song. Before that was the Greatest Blessing 2022 remix from Kumachang in Japan. And of course, featured artist of the day, Rapture Collective from Australia. Hope you guys enjoyed that song. All my thanks and love. So let's get into some news going on around the world. And of course, this news is really, really important, especially for us who are praying for the situation of the entire world. Top 3 reasons why we listen to the world news. Number 1, see what God is doing. Number 2, report and pray about the things that we hear, and also to comfort God's heart in those terrible things that we see. And there is one news today that's really terrible. We get a kind of... yeah, it's something that we can really comfort God's heart in, and you can see God crying over this situation also. Okay, so let's start off with the Russia-Ukraine situation going on right now. Some updates over the last 24 hours. We see that Russia is trying to encircle the twin cities of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, and those are both in the Donbass region. The cities sit either side of the Seversky Donets River and have been attacked for weeks. Overall, the Ukraine's defense ministry says that the Russian invasion is in the most active phase right now. Also in Mariupol, they said they found 200 bodies found in the rubble, an advisor to the mayor is saying. And of course, there are growing concerns over the impact the conflict in Ukraine could have on global food supplies. And also in Kharkiv, there's an underground railway that's... it was used as a bomb shelter in the beginning, but now it has reopened. There was a poll also in the Ukraine, and 82% of Ukrainians oppose territorial concessions. So some 82% of Ukrainians believe that Ukraine should not give away any territory as part of a peace deal with Russia, according to a new survey by one of the country's top pollsters. The huge majority said they did not support territorial concessions, even if it prolonged the war and increased the threat to Ukraine's independence, according to the poll conducted by the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology. Just 10% of the 2,000 people surveyed found it acceptable for Ukraine to concede territory to achieve peace, while 8% were undecided. Now, according to the poll, 77% of Ukrainians living in Russian-occupied territory opposed any land concessions, and the Ukrainian government has consistently said it will cede no territory to Moscow. So a lot of people are wondering, these twin cities, how important are they? What's the significance of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk? Well, as we've been reporting, Russia is trying to encircle 2 cities in Ukraine's easternmost region, Luhansk, and the regional governor says the density of shelling has been growing every day as Russian forces try to capture the twin cities of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. Now, they straddle the Seversky Donets River, and there's been fighting around there since 2014, and there have been concrete Ukrainian positions that have been hard to overcome. So capturing them would mean Russia was well on the way to its goal of taking the whole of the Luhansk region. So those are the 2 areas that are kind of you'll see like pro-Russian people living there too. So this is one of the reasons why they're actually starting the entire invasion in the first place, is because of these 2 regions. Okay, so let's move into China. And police files were hacked in China, and they're now revealing more and more of the human cost of these Uyghur detention camps that they have over there in China. And it's really sad. And this is probably the news that I thought that we can comfort God's heart in. But thousands of photographs from the heart of China's highly secretive system of mass incarceration in Xinjiang, as well as a shoot-to-kill policy for those who try to escape, are among a huge cache of data hacked from police computer servers in the region. The Xinjiang police files, as they're being called, were passed to the BBC earlier this year after a months-long effort to investigate and authenticate them. They can be shown to offer significant new insights into the internment of the region's Uyghurs and other Turkish minorities. Now, their publication coincides with the recent arrival in China of the UN Human Rights Commissioner, Michelle Bachelet, for a controversial visit to Xinjiang, with critics concerned that her itinerary will be under the tight control of the government. Now, the cache reveals in unprecedented detail China's use of re-education camps and formal prisons as 2 separate but related systems of mass detention for Uyghurs. And it seriously calls into question its well-honed public narrative about both. Now, the government's claim that the re-education camps built across Xinjiang since 2017 are nothing more than schools is contradicted by internal police instructions guarding rosters and the never-before-seen images of detainees. Now, its widespread use of terrorism charges, under which many thousands more have been swept into formal prisons, is exposed as a pretext for a parallel method of internment, with police spreadsheets full of arbitrary, draconian sentences. The documents provide some of the strongest evidence to date for a policy targeting almost any expression of Uyghur identity, culture, or Islamic faith, and of a chain of command running all the way up to the Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Now, the hacked files contain more than 5,000 police photographs of Uyghurs taken between January and July of 2018, and using other accompanying data, at least 2,884 of them can be shown to have been detained. And for those listed as being in a re-education camp, there are signs that they are not the willing students China has long claimed them to be. Some of the re-education camp photos show guards standing by armed with batons. Yet claims of coercion have been consistently denied by China's most senior officials. And Foreign Minister Wang Yi said in 2019, the truth is the education and training centers in Xinjiang are schools that help people free themselves from extremism. Right? So many have been detained just for ordinary outward signs of their Islamic faith or for visiting countries with majority Muslim populations. So the Xinjiang police files contain another set of documents that go even further than the detainee photographs in exposing the prison-like nature of the re-education camps that China insists are vocational schools. So a set of internal police protocols describes the routine use of armed officers in all areas of the camps, the positioning of machine guns and sniper rifles in the watchtowers, and the existence of a shoot-to-kill policy for those trying to escape. Blindfolds, handcuffs, shackles are mandatory for any student being transferred between facilities or even to the hospital. So we've just heard, this is just kind of more proof that is coming out, but we've heard the terrible things of like prison rape by the guards, beating and killing of people too, and being forced into these camps. So, for me, it's such a terrible thing to look at or to even think about this thing happening in the world right now. But I hope that's something that we can really pray about, because man, that's just terrible. And I hope that we'll really be able to, I know eventually the truth will come out, and that's going to be something interesting that we have to really get our hearts and our minds fixed on. Let's go over to Turkey. In Turkey, President Erdogan blanks Greek Prime Minister over U.S. remarks. So Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has said he no longer recognizes the leader of neighboring Greece and will refuse to meet him at a planned summit. Mr. Erdogan accused Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis of seeking to block the sale of American-made F-16 fighter jets to Turkey while visiting the U.S. And he said, "There's no longer anyone called Mitsotakis in my book." And this is what Mr. Erdogan told reporters after a cabinet meeting. So Greece said it would not get into a confrontation of statements. The row comes amid Turkey's threats to block a proposed expansion of NATO. Now, Ankara has accused Finland and Sweden of harboring members of Kurdish militias that it says pose a risk to Turkey. And Mr. Erdogan also accused Greece, a NATO ally, of harboring terrorists and said that allowing Athens' readmission to the security bloc in 1980 had been a mistake. Tensions have been growing between the Mediterranean neighbors after Mr. Mitsotakis urged a joint session of the U.S. Congress not to drop a ban on Turkey's membership of a purchasing program for the next generation F-35 fighter jets last week. The Biden administration has reportedly been considering dropping the ban imposed after Ankara purchased an S-400 air defense system from Russia in 2019. Now, Mr. Erdogan said this amounted to lobbying U.S. officials against Turkey and violated an agreement not to involve third countries in disputes between Ankara and Athens. Now, the Turkish president also announced a planned summit with Mr. Mitsotakis later this year, but it's now canceled, right? Pledging to never agree, right? This is what the Turkish president said. Never agree to have a meeting with the Greek leader. So while Greece and Turkey are nominally NATO allies, the two have a tense relationship that has regularly threatened to break out into open conflict. They have been at odds over the status of Cyprus since the 1974 conflict that divided the island in two, and in 2020, Ankara deployed warships to explore for gas reserves in waters recognized internationally as Greek, right? So more fighting, more disputes going over there. So let's see what happens there also. Okay, so that's the top 3 news around the world. So let's get into some sporting news. Top 3 news in sports. Start off with the NBA playoffs. We have the Boston Celtics tying up the series 2-2 in their crushing blow to Miami, 102-82. Jason Tatum leading all scorers with 31 points, 4 rebounds, 6 assists. And Victor Oladipo leading the Miami Heat, 23 points, 4 rebounds, 6 assists in a losing effort. In NHL playoffs, one series is already done. Surprisingly, it's the Florida Panthers. They lose to the Tampa Bay Lightning 2-0. They have been swept 4-0. Stunning upset. Florida was a number 1 team in the Eastern Conference, and they were swept by Tampa Bay. And Florida was even so confident about the playoffs this year that they even picked up Claude Giroux from Philadelphia. But it looks like it's coming to no avail. In the second game in the Western Conference, the number 1 team in the league, Colorado Avalanche, defeat the St. Louis Blues 6-3, and they are now leading the series 3-1, only 1 game away from clinching that series. In soccer, we talked about this last week. Kylian Mbappe moving to Real Madrid, but he reverts back to PSG in a stunning turn of events. And the reason he gave was he felt that leaving his country wasn't the right thing to do, and it was much more sentimental. And also the direction of the team is changing as well. And he talked to many people, his family, friends, lawyers, and even the French president, Emmanuel Macron, asking him to stay. Was it really about money? And the answer is most likely not, because both teams were willing to pay him a ton of money. He will be earning 57 million euros a season. Yes, 57 million euros. That's got to be like 60 something million dollars a year just for his salary, which is amazing. And he's also been given the quote unquote keys to the club with he will get a say in the choice of a manager, sporting director, and probably even players on the squad. And he's already putting that keys to the club into action by getting the current sporting director fired, which is Leonardo from Brazil. He's a Brazilian national, used to be. And Mbappe he says he doesn't work well with him. So he put in a name for the new sporting director, which is Luis Campos, who worked with him in Monaco. So let's see not Monaco, it's Monaco. I think it's Monaco, right? But that is pretty crazy news that he's going to stay. If he's getting 57 million a year, I wonder if they're probably going to trade off either Neymar Jr. or Lionel Messi. Well, Messi, from what we know, is he's going to be going to the U.S. next year, right? So that's going to be good news for the U.S. And it's probably even good news for it's probably even good news for PSG because they need to get rid of some salary also. So that is the top 3 news in sports and world current news. So I hope you guys really enjoy that section, which means it's going to lead us into a very important time for us. It's a very spiritual time. It is the golden time. This is a time of praise and worship to the Holy Trinity, and hope it's a really good time that all of us can just center our thoughts before we get into the word study today. So we're going to start off with My Beloved is Like the Sun, and then Prayer is Work, and then we'll end things off with Thanksgiving of Love.
Here on the beach, here I
Spirit and God walk with me. Always, always the Lord is with me, with me. Every day I'll live with them. Beautiful, joyful is the life I live. Full of love eternally.
Prayer is work you must do, just as things get done when you make effort. Pray and what you ask will be granted if your prayers meet God's heart. You should pray not just for yourself, but pray for your brothers, nation, and world. Pray sincerely, pray daily. It's the work you must surely do. God the Spirit and the Son want to grant your earnest prayers, and finally, at the right time, they will grant what you ask. Through your prayers, everything is fulfilled. Pray till you know that your prayers are completed. Prayer is work just as fruit grows, ripening over time. 40 days, 70 days, 110 days. You should pray until the end. God receives all prayers, He hears them and responds with joy. Through prayer we solve problems. Through prayer and conversation, we can resolve everything. Never give up, just believe and be sure to pray till the end. Through prayer you will see wonders. Yes, prayer is true power. When we were harmonious, God held back the tide, as He did that time in Mong Sampo. Then the Lord gave the word, speaking to crowds on the beach. He taught about the final days, there before the crowds in Malaysia. Port Dickson, the waters ceased to rise. God, He came when we prayed. Power comes each time we pray, comes with the word of the Lord. Power comes each time we preach, run till you reach the end. Always pray with joy till the set time with the Lord. You'll create stories of love through prayer. Our God hears all the prayers of His raptured brides of love. Truly He works miracles. Pray with love, God will hear your prayers. Pray because God is listening. Now God has said He'll answer our prayers, just as God answered us in the past. Hallelujah. give thanks with joy, pray and converse without end. In the past, Almighty God, Holy Spirit, omniscient, omnipotent, in their perfect love, they were by our side, always helping. In their grace they saved us from the life of death, and they helped us countless times. They saved our lives, they poured out their love. So we give glory and thanks.
And that was Thanksgiving of Love. What a great song. Hope you guys really enjoyed that time of praise and worship. Before that was Prayer is Work. And of course, My Beloved is Like the Sun. All right. So let's get into today's word study for, this Wednesday. And of course, every single Wednesday, we do go over the Tuesday morning Proverbs. But like we talked about at the very beginning, there were no Proverbs. It was like the leaders were kind of extracting it from the message. So like I said, it is something we should be praying about and trying to figure out what is happening right now in Korea. This is not to make people get nervous or whatever it is, but it's something that we should pray about. You know, whenever there's a small hints or things that are happening, something must have happened, whether it could be someone seems sick, that could be one thing, right? We should pray about his health. It could be something to do with like what's happening with the slander. It could be there's just so many different things that can account for this happening. But as people who are brides of this history, we should be taking all those hints step by step and one by one, okay? So today we're going to go over the Monday Proverbs, and I'm sure a lot of you guys, it's kind of good because there's 9 Proverbs for Monday, which is a lot considering how many Proverbs come out each and every day. Usually around 5 to 7, right? So there's 9 this time. And for me, when I was reading and going over the Monday Proverbs, it wasn't anything that was like I had direct answers. It was more of very conceptual, right? These are things that are very spiritual, very conceptual, and things that made me think even more deeply of what it means. I never got an answer though, but it's something that we could think about. Like it's very when we start to think about these Proverbs, like one thing I was talking to my friend, I was doing a word study yesterday. Hope you guys enjoyed those word studies. Another word study came out on Patreon. Really, really good one, going over 3 major points. But the one concept we were talking about was that, it came out in my prayer, I think, is these words come out so much, right? We had so many words. And it impacts us. Some of the things impact us right away, like, oh, that's so amazing. However, we don't really grasp the depth of these words until we start like really studying them, right? Like really, really studying them more than anything else. So I hope it's something that we can understand much more clearly. Okay, so let's start off with the Monday Proverbs for today. Number 1, and like I said, it's very spiritual, conceptual. It's something that we should be praying about, and things will click for some people and it may not click for others. Number 1 says, just like the physical world is definite and real, the spiritual world also is definite and real. Okay, so this is using one of the concepts of iwa gachi, right? Or truth is, truth can be magnified or miniaturized. One of the first charts that someone's going to receive, which is that V, right? And how do we understand certain things that we don't know about? Well, something, especially when it comes to the spiritual world, most people have never seen the spiritual world or really, really experienced it for them to say, oh, it is so definite and real. But one thing with this, the principle of miniaturization and maximization, right, is if in order for us to understand something spiritual, as long as we understand the physical, we can understand the spiritual. Or we understand one area, a smaller miniaturization, we can understand the bigger concept. So here is just like we can, we can look at the physical world, we interact with it, and it is definite and real as we interact with this physical world. To understand the spiritual world, it's saying the spiritual world is also just the same, right? Just as we interact with this physical world, we know this is definite and real. And in the same way, that's what the spiritual world is like too. In the second proverb, it says the physical world cannot exist without the spiritual world. And the spiritual world cannot exist without the physical world. Now, this one opens up so many cans of worms. Like for me, I was just like, wow, like that is a super interesting, and it brings so many questions to mind. And I think this is one of the healthy things that we need to do is when we're listening to the words, we can't just receive them as is. We have to listen to them, and it should spur more ideas and more questions and more things to pray about. So think about this. Physical world cannot exist without spiritual world. Spiritual world cannot exist without the physical world, okay? Now, if it was just the first sentence, it'd be easy, right? You say, of course, the physical world can't exist with the spiritual world, but then it says the spiritual world cannot exist without the physical world. And it's super interesting for me because it's like, how can they not exist without each other? How could the spiritual world exist without the physical world when the spiritual world existed before the spiritual world, right? The spiritual world was already running, and then somewhere in the middle, the physical world was made, right? So I thought to myself, is this really talking about like an existential problem where if the physical world disappears, then the spiritual world disappears? And obviously that's not what it's talking about. Why? Because even Sansim said, eventually this physical realm will be destroyed, right? Like even this earth will be gone, right? Everything that's physical has limitations and a limit. Every one of them, right? So we need to think to ourselves as, wait a second, if that's the case, if that's really, really the case, then we have to think to ourselves like, wait, okay, so it's not about this existential threat that, if the physical realm died off, the spiritual world would be gone. So it's definitely not about that, right? It's not talking about literal existence. So what does it mean then, right? What does it mean that the spiritual world cannot exist without the physical world? When we know the physical world will eventually go away. And in my head, I have no answers for this, but it was just an interesting thought to think about. I was like, maybe it's talking more about when it comes to fulfillment of the purpose of creation, when it comes to love, the counterpart of love, and how love cannot exist without a counterpart, right? And I think that's something that we have to think about too. But isn't it so interesting if you think about it that deeply? Spiritual world cannot exist without the physical world, but we're like, no, because the spiritual world existed before the physical world, which means it didn't need it before. And then later on, the physical world is going to get destroyed anyways. Like it's going to, anything physical has a limitation. So even if it's billions of years, it has a limitation. So yeah, it's eventually going to go away. So what does that mean? The spiritual world cannot exist without the physical world. And that's something that we have to, that we can pray about. Which leads to number 3. The physical and spiritual worlds started from one being. Now, why does that bring so many questions? Because it's talking about the beginning of the spiritual world. So physical world beginning from God is easy because God created it. But does that mean, so here's another other question that come up. Does this mean that the spiritual world, even before the spiritual world was created, God came first and then he created the spiritual world? Is that what it's saying? Right? Is it really? And I'm not saying that's the answer. I'm just saying, is that what it's saying? Or is it something more along the lines of, like, say, the Adam and Eve conundrum? Like, what's the Adam and Eve conundrum? Everyone says that Adam and Eve are the first, but then when we learn in Providence, there were people already living before them. So what does it mean they're the first? They're the first of, or they're the beginning of religious history, right? If that is a miniaturization maximization, would that be the same thing as the spiritual world already existed and then God came in and then from God is the beginning? Like, I'm not saying this is real, but these are the thoughts that come to mind because it is so conceptual, but it's so interesting, right? I can't even sit here and like understand what does it mean. The spiritual world started from God, right? The physical, we understand, but the spiritual world starting from God, that is something that is mind-blowing for me, and I don't think I can really understand that concept as well as I think I could, right? So I don't know. You guys can write your comments below because the Monday Proverbs are kind of like mind-shattering, blowing, like destruction of my mind. Like, what does that mean, right? And it just brings a lot of questions, but I think this is a good thing for us to always be thinking and questioning and what does this mean, right? Which leads to number 4. It says, God Almighty created a physical world and human beings, both their physical and spiritual bodies. If a human being has a body, it must also have a spirit. In the same way, if there is a physical world, there must be a spiritual world. Okay? So as God Almighty created the physical world and human beings, both their physical and spiritual. Okay, so God, we understand that. Now, if a human being has a body, it must also have a spirit. And in the same way, if there is a physical world, there must be a spiritual world. Now, when you look at this, it's very reasonable. It's a very reasonable logical way of thinking, right? However, this is not something that we can just look at and tell any newcomer because this would require something first. Like you would first have to really think, like you have to first prove or convince someone that God created human beings, right? And the world, like God created all things. Like that's the first thing that people would have to believe in order for them to believe the rest of the things, right? Because if I believe that God created the physical world plus human beings, right? Then I'm able to think to myself, like, oh, okay, that means that God created human beings, which means their body and their spirits. God is a spirit. So if God is a spirit and he wants to be with us and meet with us, then we would also have to have a spirit. Okay, so just as a human has a body, the spirit also has a body, right? That would be like 1 Corinthians 15, 40 and 44. And in the same way, if there is a physical world, there must be a spiritual world. But this would all be, it would all be predicated on the fact that we believe that God is, the creator of all things. Right? And this would start the logic, right? So for us, it makes a lot of sense, but to those that don't believe, it's a hard concept for them to believe. But yeah, that the big thing here is we first have to help people to understand or convince them to have faith that God created the physical world and all human beings, which includes their body and their spirits, right? And why would God create a spirit? Because he's spirit, and eventually God wants to be with us, not in body, in spirit, right? So this kind of interesting thought for me. I was like thinking to myself, I was like, yeah, it makes sense, but not to someone who doesn't believe. Like you'd have to make a great leap of faith for someone who doesn't believe to believe this proverb itself, okay? And of course, it's the same with number 5. You see the physical world with your body and the spiritual world with your soul and spirit, and it connects to number 6. Okay, so the physical world, you interact with it with your body. And the spiritual world is interacted with your soul or spirit. Okay, so Proverbs 6 says, to see, learn, and understand the things you see in the world, you need to have your eyes open. In the same way, the spiritual world exists, but you need to have your spiritual eyes open to learn about it and understand it. Okay, and I think the big thing here is about spiritual eyes, right? And this is kind of like the miniaturization and maximization truth principle, right? So just as in the physical world, to see, learn, and understand the things you see in the world, you need to have your eyes open, right? And that makes sense. If I want to see the world, if I want to learn from it and understand the things that we see in the world, my eyes need to be open. Now, in the same way, the spiritual world exists, but you have to have your spiritual eyes open to learn about it and understand it. So what does that mean? Now, it doesn't mean literal spiritual eyes, you go into the spiritual world, right? If that's the case, no one would believe in the spiritual world because you couldn't, without your spiritual eyes open, you can't learn about it and you can't understand it. However, think about this. When we believe in the spiritual world, and the majority of people have not experienced the spiritual world, like actually going into it. So here we are not experiencing, but how is it that we believe? How is it that we learn? How is it that we understand about the spiritual world? Well, the number one thing when it comes to the opening of the spiritual eyes, right, is you got to think about what does the physical eyes do? It allows you to visualize and see things. Right? And when you see it in this physical world, you're able to believe it, okay? In the same way, spiritually is a little bit different because it's about learning and understanding, which means it's in the mind. For your spiritual eyes to open, what's it about? It's about learning, understanding, gaining knowledge and wisdom, and it brings about a point of epiphany or realization, right? But in order for you to realize, your eyes must be open, right? Haven't you guys ever heard that term when someone says, I was blind, but now I see? Now, it doesn't mean that we're physically blind, but when we came to believe in Christ, we came to believe in God, what does it mean we were blind? We were blind to God, the reality of God, the reality of the Messiah, right? We never understood it. We never really believed it. But when our spiritual eyes are open, it's like, it snaps and you're like, oh, this is what it is, right? So I hope it's something that we can understand at a much different level. And we can be those that look at this and say, you know what? In order for my spiritual eyes to be open, one of the things that we need to do is we need to learn the word. Learning is one of the biggest ways that our eyes can open. It's like math. People say math is difficult, it's hard. All you see is a bunch of numbers and letters and lines on the board. I can't understand math. But if you keep learning about it, eventually there comes a point where your eyes open and you're like, oh, now I get it, right? your eyes can open to each other too. In the past, you might look down on someone and then you get to know them and then your eyes open like, wow, this person wasn't that bad. Oh, this person is actually really helpful. Oh, this person's not like this, right? And that's also something that we would say, oh, my eyes have opened to it. I can actually see reality, right? So in the same way too, our spiritual eyes have to be open to see the reality of what is happening, okay? Number 7, pretty easy. Just as God is a perfect spirit, the spiritual world is also perfect, right? And it comes in this week's message of perfect connects with perfect, right? So if God is perfect, but the spiritual world is not perfect, how could he live there? They both have to be perfect, okay? Number 8, as the physical world grows and expands, the spiritual world also expands because both worlds are connected. When your body believes in God in the world and is saved, your spirit will go to heaven. That is how the number of spirits in the spiritual world grows. Now, this is pretty intense, okay? So, the big one for me in this one, because the second part of this is connected to number 9, is as the physical world grows and expands, the spiritual world also expands because both worlds are connected. And Sasif actually talked about this a long time ago. He says that, heaven is constantly being built. It's never a finished product. It's getting better and better and better, right? And in the same way too, like even if we left the world as it is right now, there comes a point where we're not going to be satisfied with the world itself because it has to raise its level. One thing about human beings is we hate being stagnant and it needs to grow. And God is just the same. God is growing. God is God is expanding, right? So in the same way that spiritual world has to expand, it has to get bigger, more and more people are coming in. But we see that heaven is being developed. Look at how crazy the development of this world is, right? Like, it's just in my lifetime, guys. I'm going to tell you right now, in my lifetime, there was no internet. This is how new the internet is. In my lifetime, there were no cell phones. That's how new cell phones are. That's how new computers. That's how new the internet. That's how new laptops. All these things are relatively new to history. Because in my life, and I've been living for 43 and a half years, whatever it is, like almost 44 years now, there was a time there was no internet, no laptops, no cell phones, none of these things, no internet. None of them existed, right? But there is massive technological, sociological, scientific advances over the last 2 to 3 decades, which is really short compared to the 4.6 billion years or the hundreds of million years mankind has been on this earth. So, can you imagine, right? Like even heaven has been growing side by side. And heaven is a perfect place. Can you imagine how much more advanced and how great heaven is? So I think it's something that we really have to understand how amazing it is that heaven is developing too, as we're developing. As we develop, there's different wants and needs, right? Example is, in the past, people didn't care about roles, right? The roles wasn't as big, right? You go back even 100 years. No one was thinking about, oh, the woman's supposed to be in the kitchen and the woman's cooking and this and rearing the children and the men go out to work and live in that day. No one's thinking about that. Why? Because life is nothing close to what it was today. You can't even compare it. Most of human society has been living in abject poverty. Most of human existence. As crazy as that sounds, we were living in poverty. It was about survival. People dying from childbirth, stillborn babies, right? People dying from diseases, people dying early. Like, we have to think about this. Who was actually living the rich life? There was really, the majority of humankind has been living in abject poverty for like 99% of its life, right? But what's interesting is, as we've grown technologically, those things start to matter. You know what I mean? In the past, it didn't matter, but today it does. It does matter to us. And that is something that we have to think about, right? We have to think about this carefully and understand like, oh, yeah. So when we see that even as we develop and we become more comfortable, things change. right? In the same way, heaven too, as we are raising our level in heaven, heaven has to develop also so that we will constantly be more and more comfortable as we live there, living in that perfect world. So for me, that was quite an amazing like proverb itself, that even heaven is growing, expanding, and developing, right? And then, of course, it's talking about when your body believes in God and then is saved, your spirit will go to heaven. And then this is how the number of spirits in the spiritual world grow. And number 9 goes a little bit even more deeper into that growing of the spiritual world, right? It says in the physical world. So this whole 1 to 9 is using miniaturization, maximization in the same way, right? So if you want to know about God as a husband, then we have to look at husbands on the earth to have a better concept of what that means, right? So it says, in the physical world, a man and a woman get married and have children. That is how the physical world grows and expands, right? That makes sense, right? You have to have babies, and then the world gets bigger and bigger. However, in the spiritual world, when a person's body believes in God and is saved, the number of spirits in the spiritual world increases, and that's how the spiritual world grows and expands, right? And it's comparing us believing and having faith in God to conception. Not even conception, to having children, right? And that's why we're saying, are you saved? And there's that term of being born again, that rebirth. And that comes when our spirits are born into the spiritual world. How is it? It's not that the spirit never existed before. It's more of they are born into God's kingdom. And that's how the kingdom of God expands. We are born spiritually, and it begins to grow in heaven when we start to believe, when we begin to have faith, right? So which means that how does that spiritual world expand? Well, let's just say heaven. Heaven will expand when people start to believe. More and more people will be entering heaven. Which means also in the same way, what about hell? Hell is the exact same thing. When someone doesn't believe, when someone dies without believing and being an atheist or not believing in God or not believing the one that God sent, then that will expand and grow the bad part of the spiritual world, right? And this is why everyone has until the last breath for them to believe. And this is how much we want people to really believe in God more than anything else. Okay? So that is... that's the 9 Proverbs. Hope you guys really enjoyed that. These are the Monday Proverbs. Very, very conceptual, but very thought-provoking. And I hope it kind of opened and expanded your minds to what different questions pop up from these Proverbs. Okay, so there it is. That is the word study for today on the Monday Proverbs. Hope you guys really enjoyed that. I'll leave a comment below if you have any new thoughts or anything that you realized from that too. Okay, so let's get into song of choice for today. And today's song of choice is On This English Wednesday. What song we're going to hear? One of my favorite bands of all time. It is Peter Cetera and Chicago. Okay, and they have the Chicago greatest hits. They have great songs. Very distinct voice from Peter Cetera. It sounds very digital almost. But this is Peter Cetera. When he's with Chicago, the band, and this song is called Will You Still Love Me? And that was Chicago with Will You Still Love Me? And when you listen to that song, it's almost like it's God talking to us. And I think, in one sense, how many people have left God even after they first came to Him and said that they love Him forever? And you see how many people change their hearts, and God is like, will you still love me for the rest of, for the rest of our lives, kind of thing. And it's kind of a question that God is giving to all of us too. But that's the song of choice for this English Wednesday. Hope you guys really enjoyed that. If you guys have any other requests or anything, go ahead and leave it, drop it in the comments below. All right. So that leads us into the final segment for today. And usually we do have Danny's Money every single Wednesday. But today, I believe he's probably still doing his project right now. So I'm going to do a personal testimony. The first time that I ever met Sunstein. The very, very first time. All right. So let's get into this personal testimony for today. So I came to Providence when I was 19 years old. And this is in 1998. All right, so I started studying in January, and I eventually passed in September, just close to my birthday time. It's like September 22nd. And September 22nd, 1998, super excited, going to pre-dawn, meeting people, going to all the events, playing sports. It was just amazing. If I had this one regret, it would definitely be I had a chance to go to I think it was the Fall Festival in Wolmyongdong, and that was, I think it was either like September or October, October-ish, right? And I said no because of school and all these other different things. But in Thanksgiving time in November, there was like another pastor that came, and then Sunstein came in January. And here I am, super excited. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is my first time to meet Sunstein in person. I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do, right? So they asked me to be on the security team. So I'm like, wow, like I'm going to be Sunstein's security. And technically speaking, Sunstein doesn't really need security if you really think about it, because at that time, you're not looking at a ton of people in America like this, like this 24 years ago. And we're kind of like, at that time, maybe 50, 60 people were there at that time, maybe more, 70 maybe. And it was just so exciting. 4 of us guys, 2 of us were drivers, 2 of us were security, and you take it, I'm 19, 20 years old, taking it seriously, right? Like, go ahead, watch some like security bodyguard movies. I'll watch The Bodyguard with Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston. I'll watch it a couple times to make sure I got the bodyguard thing down, right? And and it's cool because you kind of feel important too, that you're Sunstein's bodyguard. And the days are getting closer, we're praying, we're setting conditions, and then it's like, all right, Sunstein's coming tomorrow. We're like, oh, and we're like, his flight will come at around 6:30 a.m. So we need to get there pretty early, probably around like 5-ish, 5:30, right? And I'm like, all right. And it's like, all right. So we had to wake up at 3 a.m. and we're like getting ourselves ready, super excited, driving to the airport. And we're sitting there like, oh my God. Like for me, it's the first time. I'm just like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm going to. And for a ton of other people, it was their first time too. And I was sitting there like, okay, and I'm getting nervous. Like, what should I say? What should I do? And in my head, I'm going to tell you right now, in my head, I thought, because, I'm thinking very former faith, like he's going to touch my hand or he's going to take one look at me and he'll know everything about me. Like I'm thinking very, very much in this mystical, like godlike figure. And I was getting really nervous, didn't know what to do. And we arrive at the airport, we're waiting there. And, honestly, getting up at 3 a.m. is not easy, right? Especially in 1999 when Sunstein came in January, it wasn't easy, and we're getting tired, right? And I'm like trying not to nod off and fall asleep, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I don't want to fall asleep. No, and at that time you're thinking to yourself, like, you're more extreme and excited. You're like, no, I can't be like the disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane and fall asleep. No, I can't do that. So I'm just like, oh God, please. And I eventually, I did fall asleep for about a good 30 minutes, right? And the reason why we were getting even more tired because he was delayed. And he was delayed, and I don't even think that he came until like 9:30 a.m. It was like 2 or 3 hours delay. So it was kind of like, oh my gosh. But, the moment they're like, he's here, and we're like, ah! And we're like screaming, like, what do I do? Oh my goodness. So, we're like, you're ironing out you're ironing out your clothes, like, okay, all right, okay. And then you're waiting at the baggage claim. So the other two leaders went up to go meet him at the gate. We're down here at the baggage claim. And, we're just waiting and waiting. We know he's arrived. We're like, oh my gosh. Oh, and we start seeing people coming into the baggage claim. We're like, okay, this is the baggage claim for Sunset. What are they going to do? What are they going to do? Right? And, then we see like the entourage come first, and we're like, it's like he's here. And then you see Sunseem walk in. And it's so, because you have these thoughts and expectations in your mind, honestly, it really felt like everything was moving in slow motion, right? It's just like everything, like, oh my, and you just see him kind of walking in. And at that point, my mind freezes. I'm like, oh, what do I do? And then someone's like, go get his bag. So I walked towards him, and I greeted him like, oh, 안녕하세요. And the crazy part was, this is the first crazy part. He looks at me like he knew me. And honestly, I'm just going to think, in my head, honestly, I think it's because I look like another Korean person probably. But he looks at me, and he looks at me, and he looks like he knows me, and he waves at me. And I'm like, and then in my head, I'm like, he knows me. Right? And then I'm like, I'm like, wow. I walk to him, and then he gives me his briefcase. And I'm just like, oh, this is the secret briefcase that has all the words inside. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm carrying his briefcase. We get his luggage. He said something to me in Korean. I have no idea what he said because my Korean was terrible. And that was the first moment. I shook his hand, and at that point, I thought, oh, all my information has been downloaded into his brain. He knows everything about me, kind of thing, right? And we drive off. So remember, this is like 9 o'clock in the morning. He's been on the flight, doing stuff. And we drive to Pre-dawn. Everyone's been waiting since 5:30 at Pre-dawn at the church. We get there like 11:30, okay? 11:30, he begins to preach another 2-hour message, right? Hits 1:30, we go to the house, we start, we eat, and then he preaches again. We go to play sports for hours and hours, come back. I think he went to get a haircut, and we ate again, and then more words. And I'm telling you straight up, we ended at 1 a.m. So we were up at 3 a.m. and we ended at 1 a.m. Okay? This is how intense it was. And after we drop him off, so he goes to bed, it's 1 a.m. and we go to the hotel next to the house and we crash. And we're like, all right, guys, we have Pre-dawn at 5:30, Sunseem's speaking. Okay, so Sunseem's speaking. We're the security guards. And we're like, okay, we crashed. So tired. And we all fall asleep. And then all of a sudden, someone's like, oh my gosh. And we're like, what? And we all wake up. Guess what time it is? It's 9:30 a.m. We're like, no, we're the security, and we are 4 hours. No, it was 9 o'clock. We're like 3.5 hours late to Pre-dawn. We are freaking out. We run to the showers. We're showering together just to quickly get ourselves ready to go. And we arrive so quickly. We got there at 9:30. Imagine if we were 4 girls, it would have been like 12 before we got there. But no, I'm just kidding. But it was like guys running quickly, doing all the things we need to do. We got to the house at 9:30 a.m. We get to the house at 9:30 a.m. and we're like, oh, how embarrassing. And we open the door to the house. And we look in, and everyone's sitting down, and we're like, oh, crap. Like, we missed it. And then we go in, and we're like, what's happening? And they're like, oh, we're still waiting for Sunseem. He hasn't come out for Pre-dawn. And we're like, what? And then all of a sudden we're like, thank God we're not late. Like, oh my gosh. So we come in and we sit down and we're like, what's going on? Oh, thank God, right? And Sunseem didn't come out until 11:30 a.m. He came out 11:30. And we're like, what? Right? So 11:30 he comes out and he gives the Pre-dawn message, right? And then we go for lunch. And I'm just like, wow. Now, this is where it gets interesting. is having like all the security team, everyone's having lunch, and they, the secretaries or the admin were there too at the table, and we're eating. And then, I thought to myself, I was like, you know what? Sunsim, he crazy gave so much messages and preaching and doing all these things until 1 a.m. He's got to sleep. He's a human being. And in my heart, I was inspired, like, wow, yeah, he's human. So I'm so moved because I'm human and he's human. He needs to sleep. And that's why I feel okay because we overslept, but it's okay because Sunsim is working harder and he's in his 50s or whatever it was. And then, or actually probably in his 40s at that time. And then, 50s, yeah, probably in his 50s. Because that's 23 years ago. 23 minus 77 is like 54, right? So, I'm really like, wow. So I go to the secretary and I turned to her and I said, hey, did Sunsim sleep well? And she looks at me and she says, oh, Sunsim never slept. I'm like, what? He's like, oh yeah, he was counseling people in Korea on the phone all night. Because remember, it's a half day away, so that's when he's counseling people all night, which means he never slept. And I was like, and all of a sudden I was like, wow, I got moved again. Because now in the beginning I'm like, wow, he's human. And then I was so inspired. And then now I'm like, oh, he's not human. And I got more inspired. I was like, wow. And that was like my first, I would say my first 24, 48 hours with Sunsim. And I was really inspired just to see like, he hasn't changed from 20 some odd years ago. And I'm sure even 10, 20 years before that, he hasn't changed. Looking at him now, how he prays over 6 hours a day, how he prunes the trees, his schedule never stops. And you can see that he's someone that sees the vision, what God really, really wants. And even in all my life, from the very, very first time I met him in January of 1999, even though it still shocks me to see how hard he works and how diligent and how much he's so fired up. For me, I'm just like, wow, no, that is impressive. That is so intense, right? So for me, it reminds me of just how amazing he is and that he hasn't changed. He's still the same, right? So I hope it's something that you guys really benefited from also, but I really, really hope that you guys can gain something from this personal testimony I've had with Sunsim when I first met him like 24 years ago, okay? All right, so that is the last segment for today, my personal testimony of being with Sunsim, and I hope that you guys really enjoyed this, and I hope that if you guys have any comments on this testimony, any things that you realized, I would love to hear it, okay? So there it is, the end of today's Wednesday podcast. Hope you guys have an amazing and awesome Wednesday service, and we'll see you guys again tomorrow on the Morning Star Drive on 117.8.
It's the Morning Star Drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly. So let's realign, just listen and fill your mind.
I'm burning with desire and the passion. Nobody can stop me when I'm like this. I got my head in the zone, I'm on the Morning Star Drive, I'm burning with desire and the passion. Nobody can stop me when I'm